All right, let's move into writing and language. This is the second section of the PSAT. And remember that writing and language and reading are one combined score. So you have two total scores that come into one final score, and your first total score is that reading and writing and language combined score. Everybody good? All right, we found writing and language. Okay, so writing and language for the PSAT. So it looks somewhat like the reading did, where you have a passage on the left and the corresponding possible correction on the right. Now the difference between the reading and the writing and language is this. In the reading, you were reading for evidence and then you were answering questions. In writing, you're actually looking at an underlined section within the passage and answering something specific to that underlined section. And sometimes it can be improved on, and sometimes it is in fact the way it should be within the passage itself. The writing and language is only 35 minutes in duration. Woohoo! That's so much better than 60, right? And then we have 4 passages, and those sources for the 4 passages will be careers, history, social studies, humanities, and science. Each passage has 11 questions associated with it for a total of 44 questions. You will again have at least one graphic associated in one passage, and you have roughly 8 minutes and 45 seconds to read and answer the questions for each one of the passages in that 35 minutes. Some will go a little faster, some will go a little slower, but on average, that's what time you have to spend. So if you're trying to manage your time, you need to be very aware of that 8-minute marker. So here's a sample of what the writing section looks like, and as you can see, we have that underlined portion within the passage, and then the 2 questions on the opposite side are associated specific to the underlined portions. So what is the content of the writing and language test? Well, you're going to see expression of ideas, development, organization, effective language use. Are you precise? Is it concise? Is it the right syntax? What about style and tone? So they're looking for that. Standard English conventions, sentence structure. Does it have a subject? Does it have a verb? Those types of things. Does it have a subject? Does it have a verb? Does it have a noun? Does it have a verb? Does it have a subject? Does it have a predicate? All right? Is your usage correct? Or is their usage correct, and do you recognize if it's correct or incorrect? And then also punctuation. Is it punctuated correctly? Should it have had punctuation? Does it have punctuation it shouldn't have? So those are all of the things that they are looking at. So here's a green slide, our strategy slide. First strategy for writing and language. Read each question before the corresponding part of the passage. What this does is it lets you know what you need to consider while you're reading, and it saves you reread time. So you don't want to read and then look at the question. You want to look at the question and then read. The other thing is you do not want to avoid the no change option. So A is always going to be identical to the way it was done in the passage. All right? You don't want to read the whole passage and then try to answer. You want to go ahead and answer questions as you proceed reading through the passage. So you want to read the question first and then read the area of the passage that's indicated. So it's going to look like this again. And what I want you to look at in this passage, let's read it really quick. My friend Johnny had been working as a mechanical forensic engineer for more than 30 years. After working as a college intern for an aerospace company, he was recruited by an established firm that specialized in forensic work. The chance to be involved in the inventions of varied types of, and it ends right there. I put an emphasis on a couple of words in there because notice that what we have underlined is had been working. And it doesn't sound horrible, does it? But it is not parallel because we were specialized and we were recruited. So we needed to has worked. Our answer choice C is what we would have selected over here. So it should read, my friend Johnny has worked as a mechanical forensic engineer, so that it stays parallel with the rest of the passage. So those are the things that they're looking for. That's how they're going to be testing you. So lots of things to pay attention to. Second strategy, consider the underlying portion as simply one possible correction of the 4 options. So I am incredibly guilty of this. Any of y'all have the SAT question of the day app on your phone? I have it. I do it every day. I love to do the writing part of it, but if I'm going to miss that, it's because the way it's written is in fact correct, and I keep trying to find the better way to do it, and there's not a better way to do it. And what you have to be really careful of here is it may sound better, but it's not punctuated correctly. So 1/4 of the time, answer selection A will in fact be the correct answer selection. So don't always assume that they've written it incorrectly, because in fact, 25% of the time, they've put it in the passage exactly as it should be. So we talked about what the content of writing and language will consist of. What are the testing items going to be? How are they going to test you on that content? They're going to have you looking at sentence structure. Can you identify a fragment? Can you? How often do we text in full sentences? And I can't tell you how many times my children have ridiculed me because I actually punctuated a complete sentence in my text, and they're like, why did you do that? So my challenge to y'all is this. We speak in text in Twitter every day. Some of y'all are doing that right now, I know. We speak in text in Twitter every day, and those are very fragmented in nature. So we need to really pay attention and recognize when something is a fragment and when something is in fact a complete sentence or when something is a run-on. Parallel structure, we just talked about in that example before. While it didn't sound horrible, it wasn't correct because it wasn't parallel in its structure. Verb tense is something that sometimes we really struggle with. Those can be kind of geographical in nature. Sometimes some areas we use a tense incorrectly, but it's done so frequently that we don't recognize that it's incorrect. So it's just a matter of spending some time back in your grammar tips and tricks and reacquainting yourself with some of this stuff. Conventions of usage. Do you have a pronoun agreement? Do you recognize pronoun agreement, or do you recognize pronoun disagreement? Possessive determiners, subject-verb agreement, frequently confused words. We have a whole big slide regarding frequently confused words a couple of slides from now. Logical comparisons, and then conventional expressions. Now this is a tough one. Nike has us saying something that is incorrect, but we do it all the time. What is Nike's slogan? Just do it. Oops, it really should be just do so. Now, if you received any type of email or text where someone said, I shall do so, you'd be like, okay, what play are you practicing for? But that is in fact the correct way to make that statement. We don't do it, but we in fact do it all the time. So while we don't need to change how we say it on a day-to-day basis, we do need to recognize that how we use it on a day-to-day basis is not correct. So a little challenge there. And it's funny, as you study this stuff, you start finding yourself going, oh, I can't say it that way. And all of a sudden you don't know what to say because you're so used to saying it one way, but you recognize it's not in fact right. All right, punctuation. End of sentence punctuation. Did you put a period on the end of your sentence? Did you capitalize that first letter in the sentence when you put that period on the end of your sentence? Great job. Within sentence punctuation, this one a little more tricky, not quite as straightforward sometimes. It's just end of sentence punctuation. Have you ever gotten one of those texts where the people have exclamation points all the time and you're like, why are they yelling at me? And they just turned something on or forgot to turn something off? Yeah, that's always fun, right? And then possessive nouns and pronouns. Items in a series like a list or the flag is red, white, and blue. How do you actually punctuate that? Non-restrictive clauses and unnecessary punctuation. That's another one that they will try to trip you up on. They might put some punctuation in there that doesn't need to be there. Let's look at an example of punctuation right here. So again, we have this field of engineering, and it's forensic engineering. And we're looking at the underlined section that's talking about vehicles. And it says vehicles vehicles working to extract natural resources for fuel. It's a little wordy for me, and so if I go over to my answer selections, I'm like, oh, it's C. C reads so much better. But it can't be C. Why can't it be C? I hear you answering me. Why can't it be C? Because the punctuation isn't correct. It does read better for sure, but we can't select C because it's punctuated incorrectly. So those are the things that they're going to try and trip you up on. They're wanting to see if you recognize, well, the flow is better, the punctuation is in fact incorrect. All right, More testing items. Development. All right? Can you create or recognize the proposition? Can you recognize the support, the focus, and the quantitative information in the development? Organization. Is it logical in its sequence? Does it have an introduction, a conclusion? Are the transitions fluid? Effective use of language. Again, we just talked about all of that. Concise is really important. They don't want you to use 15 words when you could have said the same thing with 7. So they're really looking at those types of things. And we'll actually have a strategy very specific to being concise and using as few words as possible in a few more slides. So we're coming up on brackets. Now I have to tell you, this is another retweet moment. So everybody can take their phones out and tweet this out to all of their friends. This is huge. Might be one of my most favorite tips that we give. So if you see brackets for writing, and what I mean by brackets is there's a little number above or beside the paragraph, and the number is sitting in brackets. That is a big tip to you that you want to go and look at. Oh, Texas comes out again. You want to go and look at the questions to see if you have a question, and chances are really good it's going to be the last question associated with that passage that's kind of grayscaled out. What that question is going to ask you to do is it's going to ask you to either reorder or insert something into the passage. And if you know about that before you start to read the passage, you've saved yourself a lot of time and frustration, because it would be incredibly irritating to me and probably to any of y'all to have read everything, been answering everything just like this, and get to that one and go, are you kidding me? I have to go back and read that again because it was oh so fascinating the first time, right? So this is your indicator. Hey, I need to find that question. I see my brackets. I need to find that question and see what that question is going to ask me to do before I start reading. This is what it will look like. Notice that we have the little 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, and the 5, and they're all in brackets. That's your indicator to go through the questions and find that grayscaled question. 90% of the time or more, it's going to be the last question associated with the passage. Great, great, great tip. I'll let y'all finish tweeting about it. All right, run-on and fragment strategy. This slide, we're going to stay on the slide for a little bit because there is a lot of information on this slide. And you have a few blanks on this slide that you need to fill in. All right, so let's talk about the whole issue with run-on and fragments. With a run-on, typically, it's not punctuated correctly. So it's an easy fix. A lot of times, we can either make it 2 complete sentences, we can add a semicolon or a comma, or even just a colon to make it all work together. We can also add some words sometimes that will help us do that without punctuation. But let's specifically talk about subject-verb followed by subject-verb first. So you must use a period, a semicolon between, or a comma and a conjunction. Fanboys. Are y'all familiar with fanboys? No, it's not some ick factor that's stalking you on like Instagram or Twitter. Fanboys it's an acronym to help you remember some of the more common words that help you link, right? For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Fanboy. Right, so if you see any of those words, then you know you need a comma before it to link the sentence correctly. So let's look at some examples. The coal miners needed their jobs, period. They had also wanted to preserve their way of life, period. 2 complete sentences. Well, let's put it together. We don't want it to be 2 complete sentences. We want it to be 1 sentence. How do we do that? The coal miners needed their jobs, semicolon. They had also wanted to preserve their way of life. Perfectly acceptable. The coal miners needed their jobs, comma, but, one of our fanboys, they also had wanted to preserve their way of life. All 3 are in fact correct. At this point in time, it's kind of personal choice as to what you would use, but you have to be able to identify that those are in fact correct, and if they're punctuated incorrectly, which one of the ones B through D are in fact the correct way to make that statement. All right? Okay, let's look at this one. Subject, verb, followed by a conjunction, verb. You don't need punctuation there. The subject carries the second verb because it's a compound or double predicate. Woo, lots of fancy language there. Let's look at the example. The students studied their PSATs and still had time to have fun. Oh, that's good news, right? Y'all having fun yet? All right, let's see if we can pump the volume a little bit here. So no punctuation is necessary there. Let's get into the real party scene right here. Complex sentences. All right, subordinate clause followed by a subject verb. Do use a comma between the two clauses. It's followed by, so it's subordinate followed by. That's really important. When it rains, I carry an umbrella. But if the subject verb is followed by the subordinate clause, you do not need a comma between the two clauses. I carry an umbrella when it rains. See the difference? It's kind of a natural flow as well. You hear the pause where you need the comma in the first one, and it flows all the way through in the second one. So more commas and more comma usage. So commas can be used in a list. They can separate a positives from a sentence. They offset non-essential clauses, and they can offset modifying clauses. So let's look at those examples. Please buy pens, needles, thread, and fabric at the store. All right, that's my list. And I do in fact need a comma after thread and before and for that, for the purposes of the test. The insect, a large cockroach, startled the girl in class. All right, I have to offset the large cockroach because it's describing the insect. The reporter, who had covered stories about the hospital in the past, asked many questions. So you see where those commas are really important for that sentence to be punctuated correctly. However, we do have essential clauses, clauses that have that in them. They don't need commas, so there should be no comma there. The school that was next to the highway held an auction every year. We don't need a comma, that works just fine. Dashes and parentheses can usually be replaced by a comma, but a comma cannot be replaced by dashes and parentheses, all right? And that's really more for non-essential clauses. I mean, you really wouldn't need it for an essential clause, but just so you know, you can't use dashes and parentheses to replace the comma, but you could use a comma to replace dashes and parentheses. Okay, leaving commas, whew, there's a lot of comma stuff there, and going into my favorite strategy. You can't tell me by it in this box, but I'm not very tall. All right, so my favorite strategy is that shorter answers are often correct. So shorter often is better. They avoid redundancy and wordiness. What that means is simply this. They are looking for that concise ability to write or to make a statement. So if you need 15 words to say something and I only need 8 to say the same thing, then they would prefer my 8 to your 15. So recognize when you could in fact say it with fewer words. And if you are trying to decide what the correct answer is, if there's one answer choice that has significantly fewer words or just one fewer word than the others, then look at that one first. Make sure it's punctuated correctly. Make sure that it does in fact not change the meaning of what you're saying. If it's punctuated correctly, it doesn't change the meaning of what you're saying, it's parallel, it hits all those markers you need to look for, then it probably is the correct answer. So here is a strategy. When there is a question along with the answer choice, pay close attention to the content of the question. When there's a question along with the answer choices, pay close attention to the content of the question. So let's look at this. Which choice connects the sentence to the previous paragraph? So there's a question in the question. When you see that, chances are you need to answer the question. You don't want to look for punctuation or flow here. You want to actually answer the question. That's more of that logic part, being able to find the data and analyze it. So that's not a punctuation or a flow issue, that's a can you actually answer the question issue. So when there's a question in the question. Word pairs. So these are kind of fun, right? These are all best friends. They don't ever go anywhere without the other one. But on the PSAT, sometimes they leave one of them behind. Frequently, they'll give you the first one and not the second one. If they give you both, then you need to look at both parts and check for parallel structure on either side of the second pair. So these pairs, not only but also prefer and to. Let's take a minute to talk about prefer and to. I prefer chocolate pudding more than vanilla pudding. Do any of y'all? Some of y'all are nodding your heads. Were any of y'all aware that the way I said that was in fact incorrect? Probably not. Maybe one or two of y'all. Good job, by the way. High five. But here's the thing. We say that all the time. Therefore, we don't really recognize when we say it and it's not correct. It should be this. I prefer chocolate pudding to vanilla pudding. So be really careful with prefer and to. Between and, neither nor, either or, both and, no sooner than. So again, they're always together. They never go anywhere without the other one. Just keep that in mind. So I talked about this slide a few slides ago. These are our know how to differentiate between the following and definition. Frequently confused words because they sound a lot alike, but they have very different meanings. There are a long list of these as they're all coming in. Affect and effect, that one gives me fits all the time. I always struggle with that one. I don't know why I can't keep that one straight. Let's look at between and among. How many of y'all know when to use between and when to use among? So between two, among many. Another one, precede, proceed, and proceeds. They all sound alike, but they're very, very different. I precede my sister in college applications because I'm 2 years older, so I come before my sister. Proceed, please proceed to the nearest exit at the end of this webinar. Not before you're dismissed though, please. So that is to go to, right? Completely different. And then there's proceeds. The proceeds of the benefit concert will go to the children's home. Has nothing to do with going anywhere or being first. It actually has to do with an item, generally money a lot of times. Another one, immigrant and immigrant. So an E and an I. So keep it straight this way. My friend immigrated from Brazil. She is an immigrant here in the United States. And fewer and less is another tricky one, and I'm going to go back to my elephants to help you remember fewer and less if you don't know fewer and less. If you do, then bear with me for a second. There are fewer elephants, therefore there is less dust. I can count the elephants, so if I can count it, that's when I use fewer. I can't count dust. I know there isn't as much dust, but I can't tell you how, like a number, like there's 3 dust particles less than there were before, so I'm going to use less. Fewer and less. Fewer elephants, less dust. Final strategy for writing in language. Some questions have a yes or no answer corresponding to a reason on these questions. So a lot of times you're going to know, oh, I'm looking for a yes answer or I'm looking for a no answer. So you can quickly go ahead and line out whichever one you're not looking for. That's super easy. And then if you're not sure which one, is it yes, is it no? Because again, if it were just evident all the time, you probably wouldn't be sitting here listening to me right now. So then you have to go back and read the reasons, right? And if the reason doesn't correspond to the answer, or if the reason isn't supported by the passage, then you're going to eliminate that. And you can usually eliminate 1 or 2 that way. And then of the remaining 2 answers, you have to reread the reference and see which answer is best supported by the answer-reason combination. All right, a lot of words there. I'm going to let you kind of work through that on your own for a second, make any little notes that you need to. Oh, big surprise. Participating moment. Are you ready? Whoop, practice. We're going to do a practice writing in language section. It's in your supplement as well, so it's below the reading. You had 3 readings. So find your writing. It's writing 1. It's only 8 minutes though. That's great news. Getting better instead of worse. Everybody there? Again, be cognizant of your neighbor. If you finish early, then go ahead and score yourself from the answer in the back. Get ready and begin.